celebration. I asked Valerie yesterday to let me know when we had our first, and she's still looking, but we know for sure we had one in 2001, which we did the first celebration when we had our first guided tour, the Portsmouth Black Heritage Tour. But we'll be documenting a lot more of these things as we go along. And this is the first official program under our new banner of the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire. So welcome to this momentous occasion. And I can't think of a more fitting event to celebrating the launch of this new venture than doing it at Juneteenth. All right, music, it's what we need. Because this honors a people's history of resilience, versatility, and courage. And I'll tell you a little bit about Juneteenth before we start. So Juneteenth is an intrinsic African-American celebration, and it is a day that we can all learn together, we can all celebrate together, because we're remembering and celebrating what freedom is. The observation of Juneteenth as the African American Emancipation Day is the oldest known national celebrated event commemorating the end of slavery in the U.S. Although President Lincoln's 1863 Emancipation Proclamation declared that all slaves in the state in rebellion against the Union, and I have to add that in, it was only the states that were in rebellion against the Union, shall thenceforth and forever be free. But it was not until 2 years later, on June 19, that the enslaved people in Galveston, Texas, got the news that the war had ended and they were free. So there's a lot of stories as to why this happened, but we won't go into that. There are many notions why it took Texas 2 years to free the enslaved people. So that thus marked the official end of slavery and the beginning of a new chance of life for the enslaved. So this year's our celebration will look at artists, how artists represent their voice, how they use it for activism, resistance, and for their own connection to community. And we're really pleased to have two of our local artists, Richard Haynes and Gill, who will share their work, share their stories of how they use their work as tools for resistance to celebrate their own identity and to honor their communities. Today, our celebration is in 3 parts. So we will also, at the end of, we'll have lunch today. At the end of our program, this part of the program, we'll walk over to the burying ground and we'll have a remembrance service there with Reverend Arthur Heilson leading that ceremony. And then at 7 o'clock, we have a spiritual and sacred song concert featuring Reverend Robert Thompson. And if you haven't heard him sing, you really should come because that's an experience in itself. So we hope you will join in the conversations that we have today. Join us for the rest of our programs, because I believe it is through our sharing of our stories, of the retelling of these stories, that we have a chance to heal whatever it is that divides us. So welcome, join us, and I pass the mic over to our first speaker.
Good morning, everyone. Do I need a mic? Yeah, I don't think so. All righty, so Jerry Ann, you can have this fancy machine. So good morning, everyone. So my name is Richard Haynes, and I live in Portsmouth, New Hampshire for about 29 years now. I was a young man in the Air Force, stationed at Pease Air Force Base, my first journey in the military, drafted into a war that I had no desire to participate in. But I always said there's a higher calling, and that higher calling brought me to Portsmouth as my first duty station, and I fell in love. Get out of the Air Force in 1972 and got married. And 44 years ago, June 21st, just coming June 21st, I had my first honeymoon at the Anchorage Inn, the little A-frame building. Vacation here for 16 years, and sitting at the Holiday Inn one day, and my wife and I looked at each other's, and our kids and the waiters and the waitresses says, "Why don't you guys just move here?" We got up from that table, and here it is, 29 years old. Let me go back a little bit. So in 1949, I'm born in this great country to two great parents. But unfortunately, neither one of them had education. And I'm going to show you a little film clip in a moment. That with no education, there is no freedom.
It's true.
Education will give you freedom and opportunity in this country like nothing else. I was fortunate, although my mother didn't have an education, she quit school in the 8th grade because they were born sharecroppers. That's their job. They woke up every morning to pick harvest for the richest people in the world. Now, why am I telling you all this story? I'm going to tell you why art was so important to me. Bear with me. So Mom quit school in the 8th grade. Her father died of a massive heart attack while going down at the marketplace in Charleston to sell his crops that he grew on his own. Because he was determined that making $900, $1,000 a year was not going to feed his family. And why we need to be activists. That's another reason why we are telling this story. My father quit school in the 6th grade as he watched his father pull on his shirt as they're working that field, and his father, 47 years old, lied down in that field and died of a massive heart attack, and this kid had no ability to do anything else. He quit school because his mother had 4 younger siblings. And he was the biggest, he was the guy in the family. So we all decided, we've got to get out of here. African American migration. Moving north for a better way, but poverty even followed us right up to Harlem, 127th Street. Rats, roaches, heroin addicts, all met us there. Quickly, years have gone by, and I met a middle school teacher, Mrs. Mary Mage Powers, my art teacher. I'm in her homeroom and I'm in her art class, and that little petite Jewish woman said to me, my advocate, my believer, said to me, Richard, one of these days you're going to be a great artist. And on my watch, you are going to be a great artist. We're in the middle of the civil rights movement. This woman should have had no desire to want to support this young African American male. Advocacy. So, big city school. Quickly I go, she put me in the best high school, from middle school into the best high school in New York City, High School of Art and Design, for artists. When you're away from your mentor, you get lost. Mini skirts was in, basketball and high heels. Made the mini skirts look even better. I paid attention to it. I love my photography and I love my art, but I wasn't paying attention to math, science, foreign language, social science, and English. They told me, but I'm going to go to college. 4 years happened real quick, like I didn't have the opportunity to do that. Drafted into the military 6 months after graduation. Did my 4 years. I wanted to be a photographer in the military. That's what I did in high school. I was a dental technician. The closest thing I got to photography was x-rays. So I returned back home, and Mrs. Mary Mage Powers, that little petite Jewish woman, met me at JFK. And she said, are you ready to finish your college education? Got me into Bronx Community College. She says, you're only going to spend 1 year here. Got me into my Bachelor's of Fine Arts. She says, not a BA, BFA. It's the highest. Then she says, when you're through here, we're going to get you into Pratt Institute. and you're going to get an MFA. If you want to be considered a serious photographer, a serious artist, you need to have an MFA. And I went on and got my MFA. Unfortunately, she passed before I completed my master's. But every major exhibition I'm in, her children still follow me. That is what we're talking about today. How do we support each other even when we are not of the same culture, same wealth? How do we support each other? If we've been looking at what's happening in the country today, you look at every little postcard, every little note card that a child or a banner that's being held before us today, it is art. It is advocacy art. And we need to be creating more of them. We need to have workshops to create more of them. So now before I go on further to my talk, here goes an extraordinary piece of advocacy work. This is Edward R. Murrow. So if you think that this kind of work, art has been done just starting today, you don't know your art history. Goya painted for the poor. Pablo Picasso painted against the war. Catherine Clute painted against the German war. Diego Rivera painted against the repression of the Mexican. Jacob Lawrence spoke about the great African-American migration. We can go on. Edward Weston and Ansel Adams talk about the change of the planet itself in his photography. We can go on and on. Jacob Riis, the child labor, the photographers of the depression, photographed the hardships of what people were going through, and all of these imagery changed the way we thought about things we so quickly neglect and give up. But until we come into rooms like this and have a conversation, imagine, we can stop that one. Imagine coming into rooms like this and then having conversation, getting fired up to do something about what we just heard about poverty, creating artwork, whatever your thoughts are, because each and every one of us are going to have different thoughts. We're going to come at different levels. But we having conversation and creating artwork, it's amazing what we're going to learn when we leave this room. And how our hearts will change. And our direction. To whom much has been given, much is expected. I know I'm preaching to the choir right about now. So 29 years ago, I was so poor moving to this town. Believe me, I don't know what happened. But I thank God it did happen. I was a big New York City photographer with $225,000 in my bank account, back pocket. It became my God. Moved to Portsmouth, figuring life was going to be sweet. As I told you earlier, this was it. But I think I stepped ahead of God, and God wanted me to go into a desert moment for a moment, because he wanted to let me know man must not live by bread alone, but every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. All of it taken away. Because I had a talent that I was using in the wrong direction. Three years I sat here in poverty, and very seldom did anyone hear me. Very little people heard my poverty. cried for help. And I sat in rooms with some of the most distinguished people in this community. No one heard my cries. I said to God, if I could survive this journey, my talent belongs to you. I will be the voice to the faceless in this country. And all of a sudden, I got a purpose for painting. I started painting my life first, because I had to understand self first. And then I began to paint the life of others. There is one more clip that I need to show you. Joe, if you don't mind. At the age of 18, right up until I moved here, this was the environment in which I lived in. Now, if I'm living in this environment and this is happening, I call this one the Beast and the Beauty. Mom promised me she was going to take me to a better way. She promised we were going to go to a better way, right? Fleeing that first video, leaving the Deep South, going to a better way in the big city. Right there and then, I thought that I needed to begin to photograph this because this is the Beast and the Beauty. 15-minute ride south of Harlem in the Bronx, you had Midtown Manhattan, the wealthiest communities you could ever imagine, and architecture that, wow, out of roll. And 15 minutes north, this is what we had. No voices, no one cared. So I decided you have to make images of this. No different than Edward R. Murrow did. How do we portray the neglected in our society? How do we portray poverty? The drug addicts would strip all the wood off of the bench and literally burn it as the wood off of the bench as they waited for their drug dealers. The city quickly tore down the abandoned building because we know that the heroin addicts will go in and shoot their junk and burn down out everyone. People had no education, they had no income to repair their places in the proper way. I'm looking at the same time Walker Evans, the farm security photographers, learning my craft. No education, no washers, no dryers. City, you're considered a missing class when you're poor. And your gutters are all blocked up. No one comes and sweep. Not easy to survive. Drug addiction, alcohol addiction. No education, and think about being an entrepreneur. These are my colleagues. The two in the front went to Middlebury College on a basketball scholarship. Everyone else incarcerated, dead, or drug infected. Education will give us freedom and opportunities. So I came here 29 years ago, and believe me, I do not call myself a victim. I am one blessed young man. I did meet an angel here, and that was Miss Elise Gray, Pastor Elise Gray. I still call her Pastor Elise Gray. She really supported me in the middle of my poverty. But I decided I was going to take my energy and turn my work into advocating for the faceless in our society. So let's go through some of my paintings. So I look back first. I'm from Charleston, South Carolina, and I think there's some South Carolinians in the room. And I sort of remember working folks, because people have said some ugly things in our society about people of color. And I wanted to bring attention to that like any society, as you looked at that Harvest of Shame video, we noticed that poverty doesn't care about culture. It really doesn't. It cares about how we work together and support each other through it. How do we help each other get back up and move forward? And I decided that there is no greater way than to tell this story through art. Whether it's through my photograph or my painting, there is no greater way. All the bright colors was to bring joy to a situation that seems so bleak. Because I found joy in the middle of my poverty. I found joy in the middle of my poverty. I was so broken down, I decided I was going to literally end my life. But thank God I didn't. Thank God for Miss Elise Spray. All right, so I started painting my life. Hardworking folks in the Deep South. People with a lot of pride and dignity. Young men who are just not street thugs, but people with fabulous attitude, characters, entrepreneurs. African-American family, if you read the media every day and you look at the media every day, it was a broken life, a broken community. My community wasn't broken. Spirituality was always in our family's life. And spirituality, I wish that we didn't just go to churches of color. I wish that we'd have all just sort of, the way God intended it, to be a melting pot in a church, as we are here today. Learning from each other. This series of work is life the way it should have been, as opposed to the way it was. Notice the knickerbocker. Notice the little wooden toys. So I'm setting a date here. I'm setting a date here. I'm not convicting anyone in this room. I'm just setting a date. I am just advocating for life the way it should have been, as opposed to the way it was. A child wishing for only better. We didn't study together, but look at this room today. Dr. King's dream has come alive. We couldn't play in the park together because African Americans weren't allowed in public parks. We could not have had one water fountain because African Americans would not have been able to drink from that water fountain. This one is in homage to Emmett Till. This is called The Touch. Right there. Everybody know Emmett Till's story? Mm-hmm. That's The Touch. That little boy tonight will probably not survive. But this is a reminder of where we were, and I wish life was better. This image suggests that we possibly ate in the same shop. I wish that our grandfathers stood on the street corner. This piece is called Wisdom, and spoke about the wisdom of the community and shared the wisdom that they had. Working together in the fields. And this, Denny, is a piece that your museum owns. How our children in time could literally play and love and respect each other. I am now working on a series of new paintings because the world has not changed. We are revolving and getting even messier. And here now I'm looking at a new series of works. No mother in the right mind has birthed a child Notice the mother and child. Notice the love symbol. No mother in their mind would birth the child and so say go off and dress in a uniform, go and kill people, or just kill people, or any of that sort of stuff. Too much love in that, moms. We know what you've done. You've created a beautiful world. But why aren't we operating in it? Love does never, never, never would love put us in boxes. Love breaks out of the box. The whole series of work is also in the rainbow colors. This is when we came over in slave ships. Why aren't we together in all colors working together? This, are we chained together in love, or are we still chained together in hatred? The yin and the yang symbol. And notice the dove. Notice the dove? The dove is throughout the whole piece. This is the dove, the head, the olive branch, and the wings. The dove again, notice, because it's only through that Holy Spirit that we're going to survive this messiness. All right? And so, I'm spending my life through the arts. I promise my higher power, my God, that I would use my talent to make the world a better place to live in. And I couldn't think of a better way of doing it while we're all sitting here together. I wish now we had an art class. We all had our little pencil and piece of paper, and we can all go off and sketch from that 20 minutes dialogue, 30-minute dialogue. What did we learn? And then have group conversation. And then at the end of this, maybe a week later, we all come out with images that depict what you have learned about sitting together among each other. There's so much to be shared, so much love to be given, but we have to be willing to come together and talk about it, and then go forward. Thank you all very much.
We do have time for Q&A if anybody wants to have a dialogue with Richard. Any questions? Any thoughts?
Yes.
When you were sharing some of your story, how did your mentor know you were coming back? That you kept in touch with her?
Oh yes. Mrs. Mary Mapes Powers did not leave me out there in that wilderness all alone. I got more emails. I got more letters, handwritten letters from Mrs. Mary Mapes Powers than I got from my family members. She literally shared her family with me. Why she selected me, I'm going to say, thank God there is a God. And I believe it's all went full circle, all because of even this moment. Yes.
How did your you originating in photography? How did that impact your eventual transformation to
art? Mrs. Mary Mapes Powers said, Richard, I know you love making photographs. But what I want you to understand is if you continue to make photographs and do the art simultaneously, you'll find that your photography and art will literally affect each other. And literally it does. Alright? It helps me, looking through that viewfinder with one eye, helps me to see much clearer when I get to that canvas or that piece of paper that I work. And my work, by the way, is originated as crayon on paper. So this is crayon on paper. Right? Just rubbing that piece of paper, 300-pound watercolor paper, until all the pores in the paper is filled in. This particular piece talks about, you notice the dress style. So it speaks on a certain era. It says, you know, we don't go to church together. Well, why aren't we going to church together? This piece speaks about the African-American family as such a broken family. That's the way I remember my household. We were so closely connected together. There was no brokenness in my household, so I don't know what the media was talking about. This particular piece I did 2 years ago for CASA. Anyone know CASA? The Advocacy Agency for Children. And once more again, helping a community to understand neglected and abused children are truly in need of our help. And then this particular piece right here came from the series of work that I did about, life the way it should have been as opposed to the way it was, and that's unity. That was probably the last piece of the exhibition, so we went into a sequence, and that was the last piece, and the last piece is suggesting that we should all just sort of come together and work together. Yes, one more.
Do you still photograph? I loved your photographs as well. Do you still do some?
Yes, I still, my photography is very sort of sacred, So my community is a little different, and so I photograph different things, but it's always a very sort of a peaceful moment. It's very meditative. Although my work is very peaceful and meditative too, but I could manipulate the artwork a little bit better than I could manipulate photography. So photography for me is just that Ansel Adams says it the best. I conceived the image hanging on the wall before I tripped the shutter. And I'm in that sort of a moment.
Is it still black and white?
Color, but you can easily switch it into black and white. Yeah. And I'm slowly moving towards digital. I'm not convinced with the digital.
Okay. Don't do it.
Oh. Last question.
Can you say something about the artists who may have influenced you over the course
Yes,
of your life?
matter of fact, I should have brought some images. So, Milton Avery. What was that, Valerie?
What did she say? Oh.
Who were the artists that influenced me? Milton Avery, Diego Rivera. Milton Avery for big flat shapes, right? Milton Avery was a northern sort of New England artist. Big flat shapes. Jacob Lawrence for its multiple shapes as well. Matisse for color. And Catherine Clue as content, right? Content meaning I'm going to speak about a subject that needs to be brought to attention. All right, Jacob Lawrence did the same thing. So we want to utilize the art. I always say that artists are cultural keepers and cultural makers. What would we not know about the prehistoric men and women had it not been for the artists? Culturally. Cultural makers. John and Yoko Ono said, all we are saying is give peace a chance. And that war somehow came to a stop, and they wanted to silence those two participating. James Brown came up with a song that says, say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. And African Americans started wearing afros and dashiki. They made a culture. And so what I'd like to do, when all of a sudden we're standing here and we are just, boom, all gone. The art majority of art that's painted out there are about African Americans. Some of it is, if you've never look at the vaudeville era. It's unbelievable of what they said about our community. I want that all of a sudden, if the computers are left and these images are left, and archaeologists and sociologists and anthropologists come in and unearth this little room and turn on these images, they're going to say, wow, these people really got along together. Wow. And these people of color look really good, too. That's what I'm trying to create. So when I am dead and gone, and someone finally looks at my work, really look at my work, they're going to say, job well done.
Job well done, Mr. Haynes. So thank you so much, Richard. And we're moving on to another part of our program, and I have to apologize that I rushed my program earlier, but our songstress will entertain us just before we eat. But right now we have a special presentation, and I'd like to call Langner Marsh forward. We are so honored and so proud to be the recipient of a legacy piece from the Langdon family. And we have a descendant here of Governor John Langdon who's going to make that presentation to us. So.
Oh, thanks, Jerry. So, hello and welcome. My name is Langdon Marsh, John Langdon Marsh. I'm named after the fellow with the big house that's down on Pleasant Street. And I think it's my great-great-great-grandfather. I'm here because I'm very proud and happy to be giving to Black Heritage Trails of New Hampshire the silver tray that belonged to John Langdon. And the reason it's important to me and why it's important to the discussion today, and Mr. Haynes' talk was very relevant, I think, to what I believe also, is that to me the tray is more than just a piece of silver. It's very nice, and you'll see it in a minute. But it's really something that, while it was purchased by John Langdon from England in the early 19th century, and it was used, it's the kind of tray that's called a waiter, and it's a big thing with handles on it, and people who came as guests to the Langdon house were served probably wine and grog and who knows what else on this tray in the big reception room on the first floor. And so it was John Langdon's tray, but really, in a very important and meaningful way, it belonged to the people who used it, who served the guests with it, who cared for it, cleaned it, polished it, made it safe, and have kept it for the last, so that we have it 200 years later. These folks were mostly African-American servants. Some of them, maybe many of them, former enslaved persons, some of whom had worked under the Langdon family before they were emancipated. And to me, the connection is that the tray symbolizes a common story, a story that does touch on both black and white folks, and giving it to Black Heritage Trails of New Hampshire with an accompanying donation allows the stories of the people who have lived here for many centuries to be told, and as the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire does so well and will continue to do over the coming years. So I wanted to make this donation really to serve the purpose of bringing people together. Mr. Haynes was so beautifully illustrated. To understand the history that is a very difficult history in many ways and continues to impact us today. While the institution of slavery ended in this area, a couple of hundred years ago, and while the laws that specifically allowed unequal treatment of blacks had gradually been abolished, a lot of it over my lifetime, starting with after the Second World War. I was born just before the Second World War, and then through the Civil Rights Movement and today. We're not done. We still have this legacy that we have to deal with in order to truly come together as human beings with a common understanding of who we are and what our strengths and frailties are. I belong to an organization It's a national organization called United to End Racism. And we use listening and other tools to bring people together to help whites understand and unravel their unconscious biases, and blacks to undo the harmful effect that racism has had on their self-image over the last centuries. The goal of this organization, and it's a very hopeful goal, and I believe in it strongly, is that we can end the residues of racism, the active racism and the implicit racism, the institutional racism, by the end of this century. I think it's quite possible, and I think it has to be done. So organizations like Black Heritage Trail New Hampshire help in this, achieving this goal because they remind us through these stories that they tell so well, and the activities and events like today, the huge contributions of Black New Hampshireans to our shared history. So, with that, I'd like to open up, maybe ask Valerie and Jerry Ann to help me do this. So I think symbolically I'll let you take it out. So that's the tray. It has a, you can't see it very well from out there, but you'll see it later. It's a family seal, the Langdon family, I guess. It was probably cast in London around 1810.
Face it forward, directly forward, because of the reflection. Okay, yeah, thanks.
And one of the stories that I like about it is that it probably was used in serving people by a wonderful character that Valerie has written about in her book called Cyrus Bruce. And while he didn't serve George Washington with this tray because it was 20 years earlier, probably he did serve Washington as guest with some other tray. But I'm pretty sure that he must have used this one because I think he did stay with Langdon until Langdon's death or somewhere around that period. So quite possibly did. So it's nice to have an actual human being to think about whose care for and use of this tray was part of his daily life. So I thought I had a little thing for the three of us, I guess, can sign it, right? This is a deed of gift. So it basically says, I'm giving the property to Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire. And I'm going to sign my name and ask Jerry Ann and Valerie to witness it. And once that's done,
I'm too nervous.
I think we just enough. Like to recognize my brother Norman and his wife Mitzi. Mitzi actually gave the final polish to it. Wonderful, I must say.
So we're actually going to ask Norman and Mitzi to come forward as well.
Mitzi's taking video.
Okay.
You're taking it's all video.
Yes.
Anyway.
And the news about the tray, if you want to see it, we are so honored to have Strawberry Bank, Larry Hearden, he's here, and I'll ask him to come forward. But we will have an exhibit that will open on July 3rd with the tray and about Cyrus Bruce. And so the tray will be at Strawberry Bank with us, with Larry for a while.
For the temporary caretakers. Thank you.
Right. So if you could just what we're going to be doing on July 3rd is we're having a reading of Frederick Douglass's July 3rd papers, and then we'll have the opening, the unveiling, the opening of the exhibit. So if you want to read the papers, join us on July 3rd, in other words. We'll need lots of readers.
Where will that be?
Yeah. Shiny, huh?
We have no size.
There you go.
So at this moment, thank you all so much for, and thank you again to the Langdon family for entrusting us with this, their family piece. I'll ask Tanette Richards to come forward, please. Richardson, sorry. Tanette Richardson.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank Mrs. Cunningham for inviting me here. The song I'm about to sing is from the movie Cadence. And the person who sings the song, it's about racism, how they segregated even the officers in the military, how they segregated them. And the person who sings the song is Harry Stewart. And the actors in it is Charlie Sheen, Martin Sheen, and Lawrence Fishburne. And it's a good movie. It's a good message behind it. And the title of the song is End of My Journey. Lord, you know that I've been bad, so there's no use in lying to myself. Heavenly Father, please forgive me. I really don't want to discern myself. Oh, when I come to the end of my journey, weary of life, the battle is won. Just carry my step across of redemption. We'll understand it better by and by. Lord, sometimes I feel like Samson. You know the world has so many Delilahs. Almighty God, give me just a little more time to right all the wrong that I have done. Oh, when I come to the end of my journey, we
we'll understand it better by and by. We'll understand it better by and by and by, Lord. We'll understand it better by and by. We'll understand it better by and by and by. We'll understand it better by and by.
Wow.
I got an undergraduate degree in graphic design and a graduate degree in painting, and now I draw comics, which is a very circuitous way to get to this place. But I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that and the reasons behind the stories that I make. There's some of my books back there on their table, my 3 books, and I have a 4th one coming out in February called Strange Fruit Volume 2, which will be more uncelebrated narratives from Black history. You can probably hear in my accent, I'm not from here. I am from southwestern Virginia. I grew up in a little town called Rocky Mount. If you've ever been there, you'll miss it going through it. It's a really beautiful little town. And about 13, I moved to Roanoke, Virginia, which was about the size of Manchester, which is a city. Originally, you know, I was, and most people say I look like a football player, but I got a varsity letter in chess. And that's not a joke. I actually did get a varsity letter in chess. I didn't play football. I didn't play basketball. I was just outside. And when I got married really young, I got married at 20, and decided that, you know, I'd drawn all my life. And other than a brief understanding that I might want to be a lawyer until I met my father-in-law and decided that that was boring, I decided to go to school for comics, try to figure out how to draw comics. And I went to a program where I was, there was no comics or illustration programs in anywhere where I was from in southwestern Virginia. So I went to school for graphic design. And while there, I take a painting class, and then I fell in love with painting for a long time. And if you paint, one of the things that's hard to figure out when you start looking at people who are artists and who make things is why do they make the things that they make? And at the time, I was just trying to figure stuff out. I had no real understanding about why I was making the things that I made. So I asked one of my teachers, Brian Seebeking, who was he was a collector of folk art and outsider art, and he had made these really weird paintings. He was painting like Elvis as a baby, and Jerry Lee Lewis, you know, like all these like Southern rock stars. And I'm like, why do you paint these weird things? And he was like, well, I met Howard Finster. And if you don't know who Howard Finster is, he's one of the premier outsider artists in America. He said, I met Howard Finster, and Howard Finster painted really weird things. And if you know anything about folk art is sort of like these people who are probably past 50 or 60, who just start painting later in life. They don't really think about the process. They just start making stuff. And they have like 1 foot in a church and 1 foot in HBO. So they have like this weird sort of like dynamic about the things that they paint. And he said Howard Finster was painting like, you know, Henry Ford's wife. And the path to hell was paved with good intentions. And if you know anything about Howard Finster, he said that he once saw a glob of paint. He was painting a bicycle. And the glob of paint on his finger spoke to him and said to make sacred art. And he said, but I don't know how, to the glob of paint. And the paint said, learn. I think that paint was not latex paint. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that. It probably wasn't latex paint. So Brian told me this, that's why he painted what he painted. So I had to start thinking about what I wanted to paint. And about that same time, there was an article in the newspaper in Roanoke about this tree that had been cursed in downtown Roanoke. And people said that the tree was cursed because it had been a lynching tree. And it had been the scene of one of the worst lynchings in Virginia, which actually caused some of the first anti-lynching laws in the country because of the scene. It started in a little town. It started in Roanoke with a woman who had come from Fincastle, which is just up the road from Roanoke. She comes up the road to go to this little farmer's market, and she's selling grapes. And this guy comes up to her, and he haggles with her over a bushel of grapes. And he says, I can pay you what you want, but you have to come over here. So he takes her over to an alley and bludgeons her. He doesn't kill her, but he leaves her and he robs her. During this time, there was an all-black neighborhood called Henry Street and the Yard that was just off of the farmer's market. So of course, the police went to the farmer's market and just found the first black person they could find, black male, and took him to the hospital where this woman was. And she said, if you can show me his hat, I can tell you if that was him or not. So they showed the hat and they said that was him. So they put him in jail. At the same time, all the religious leaders in Roanoke were gone. There was no one there. They had gone off on a trip or a conference. And so Roanoke is this weird area where there was a lot of these West Virginia rail riders, these people who worked on the railroads that were down in these bars along the railroads. And so these people got heard wind of it. And so they all come back to the jail, and they're going to get this guy. And the mayor calls out the local militia to surround the jail to protect them from this lynch mob, and then they shoot into the militia. They shoot into the crowd and kill 2 people. So it disperses for a little bit, but a couple hours later they come back. But by then, they had actually moved the man, and I can't remember his name, and his name is not even where I can find it. They moved the man, and they move him to, they're going to take him to a different place so that he doesn't lynch, but they actually catch up to the wagon that was taking him back and drag him back to Roanoke. And then they spent an entire weekend torturing this man. They hung him. They put his remains in a tree. They put notes on the tree. They were going to take the tree. They were going to take him down and take him to the mayor's house and bury him at the mayor's house. By that time, the clergyman came back and said, this is, broke this up to keep people from doing this. And they took his body down to the Roanoke River and burned it. They had picnics outside of this, while they were burning this man's body. They put gasoline on it and burned it. So these are some of the newspapers where it was in the late 1890s that this occurred. And so, that's sort of stuck with me for a long time about this way of thinking about lynchings. And this is another really famous lynching of a mother and her son. The son was accused of the crime, and the mother was trying to stop them, so they lynched her too. And so I started thinking about this way of doing some paintings. Like I started getting a lot of lynching images and trying to get as much information as I possibly can about lynchings until one day I remember, so it was 2001, 2002, it was late 2001, sitting in a Kinko's at like 4 o'clock in the morning, printing stuff out, because that's where I was working at the time. And I just came to a place where I'm like, I can't look at these images anymore. I put them all in a box and put them away. And about this time I got into Boston University to go to grad school for an MFA in painting. You can see my apartment where that red arrow is somewhere over there where the Sipho sign. And at this time I had 4 kids, it was me and my wife, and I'd never lived outside of Southwestern Virginia before, so we moved to New England, which is one of the greatest culture shocks in my life, because I discovered something above the Mason-Dixon line that I didn't know existed above the Mason-Dixon line. Bad potato salad and racism. You might not know that I didn't think there was going to be racism above the Mason-Dixon line, because I didn't think there was. Everything that I knew about New England was this was the bastion of liberalism. This was like a different place in the world. But I have to tell you a little bit about the small town that I came up from. This is a place called Bald Knob, and this is Rocky Mount, Virginia. And when I was a kid, you could get to Bald Knob by just walking through somebody's yard and through some woods and go up there. This arrow, that's about where the projects that I grew up in was. It was a place called Candlewood Apartments, F12. And I drove my bike all over this town. This is all during the early 80s, late 80s, all through this town. I was never afraid to go anywhere. And in 1983, when I was about in 3rd grade, there was a Klan march right through the downtown. And so we would go through these places, and we knew where Klansmen lived. Like, we could drive down the road, it's like there's a Klansman lived there. I remember one time we were driving down this road called 40 West, and there was a little Rueton club And I remember asking my mom, what was this little white building? And she didn't say the Royalton Club. She said, that's where they have the Klan meetings. And I was like, okay, so like this is embedded in my psyche, this idea that in the South, this is what we have. But I was never afraid. I would go to people's houses and climb their cherry trees and just sit in their cherry tree. I didn't think about whose house it was. I just went there. You know, it was this really weird sort of thing where I think one of my favorite quotes by Dick Gregory says in the South, they don't care how big you get as long as you don't get too close. But in the North, they don't care how close you get as long as you don't get too big. And that was a really clear understanding that I learned when I was in Boston. And I was in Boston, and one of the things that struck me is that one of my first jobs was drawing caricatures on Faneuil Hall. And I draw caricatures in Virginia, and that's sort of like how I made money. And I was down there one night, and I told this guy that I was from the South, and that I lived here, I just got here, and he was like, well, he started listing off all these neighborhoods not to go in. And especially not to take my white wife with me to these neighborhoods. He said, don't go to this neighborhood, don't go to that neighborhood, don't go to this neighborhood. Now remember, I was from a place where there was a Klan march when I was like 8 years old, and I was never afraid to go anywhere, and now I'm like afraid to go to places. So we spent 2 years in Boston, and we escaped in 2004. And I went back to Southwestern Virginia. I spent 2 more years down there running the gallery and teaching. And I realized when I went back to Virginia that I was a black man who was in love with the South, which is a weird thing. It's kind of like marrying a prostitute. There's just some things you don't talk about. And I started thinking about those lynching paintings again, and looking at them from a different point of view, more about the progress that we had made, but how much work we still had to do. So I started working on a series of paintings called Strange Fruit, based on Billie Holiday's songs. This was the most successful of the group, which is called Strange Fruit Harvested. And I worked on this painting for a number of weeks, and I did a big diptych painting that had an entire lynching scene that was sort of remnants of descent paintings, which are Christ paintings coming down. And a friend of mine who was from grad school actually lived close to me in Virginia, and he came to look at my paintings and he said, your paintings are trying to tell stories and they're failing, which is not something you want to hear when you spent 2 years in Boston working on a painting degree. So I started thinking about the idea of narrative and how to use stories to tell a story, how to use art to tell a story. So I went back to the idea of drawing comics. And so then I started working on, I literally just started drawing comics. Just started drawing something. I read comics and thought I knew it, and I started drawing it. And this is a story that I worked on. It's in a box in my attic somewhere called Dandelions. And it's this metaphorical story about growing up in Southwestern Virginia in the projects. And I spent probably a couple of years on this, drawing it, putting it together, and then about that time we moved back to New England. And I met people from the Boston Comics Roundtable, which is a group of cartoonists, probably 200 people involved in this group who meet every Thursday. They used to be at the Democracy Center in Cambridge, which was, I think, a communist hangout. And now they meet in the Cambridge Public Library. I went down there and I took my magnum opus. This was the thing that I've been working on. I've been in my studio, like slavering over it, looking at these pages, going, I'm brilliant. Why hasn't anybody noticed me yet? I am the most important cartoonist of the 20th century, is what I'm thinking to myself. And so I go to the Boston Comics Roundtable. I think I had like 50 or 60 pages of this story. And a friend of mine named Jesse Lonigan, who is a cartoonist, who's a friend of mine now, I barely knew him at the point, and he was looking through it, he went through it like this. It's like, I'm 30 pages into this, and I don't know what the hell I'm reading. So here I am failing again. I'm failing at trying to tell a story. And so at this point, I decide I need to figure out how to use this medium, because I went to school for painting, so my background was in fine arts and graphic design, but not in illustration and cartooning. So I went back to get myself a library degree. Is anybody familiar with a library degree? A library degree is when you have a library card and you are tenacious and you bother the librarians about everything you can possibly learn about a specific subject. So I went back to get myself a library degree. And I started just sort of like drawing things, like drawing cartoons. This is a short story that I do based on Winsor McCay's Little Nemo in Slumberland. Little Nemo in Slumberland is this cartoon that ran for about 13 years in the early part of the 20th century, from about 1895 to 1913. And it was about this little white kid named Nemo, and he would go on these amazing adventures at night, and he would always wake back up in the morning. And so I started doing a parody of it called Little Nemo Brown in Slumland. And in mine, it was a little black kid who would go to sleep and have these conscious dreams, but always wake up as the white kid in 1908. So I started just like drawing comics and learning about comics. This is a story from Strange Fruit about Harry Bucky Lou, who was the first professional basketball player who played in the league in Lowell, Massachusetts in 1902. This is just more just drawing about how to do comics, how to tell stories, how to use this language to tell stories. These are some pages from my Tales of the Talented 10th series. I did a story based on Maverick Island in Boston, which was John Maverick, who had this idea to breed slaves on this island. So I did a story, a historical comic about that. But around the same time, I met a cartoonist named Box Brown. He just did a book about Andy Kaufman. He's done a book called about Under the Giant. And I had been cyber stalking him on the internet for a long time, and then I Googled his name one day, and I came up with the story of Henry Box Brown. Henry Box Brown, if you're not familiar, is a slave who mailed himself in a box from Virginia to Philadelphia to escape from slavery to freedom. And so I sent Box in that email, and I'm like, I understand you're a white kid in Philadelphia, but why do you have the name of a slave? And he said, well, I'm square-shaped, so my friends call me Box. But one day, I might do a story about this guy. And I said, that's a fantastic idea. I'm going to steal it. So I stole the idea of Henry Box Brown, and I drew a story about Henry Box Brown, because I had been trying to figure out how to tell my own stories. So I drew the story, and then I sent it to him. He's like, oh, this is great. But comics are different than if you make a painting. If you make a painting, you talk to gallery directors, you talk to museums, you try to get into shows, but with comics, you basically skip the middleman and go directly to the people. And I wanted to get my stuff out there to people. I wanted to start telling them, and I wanted to put together my own version of Chris Ware. This is one of Chris Ware's Acme Novelty Library. Chris Ware actually is one of the most important cartoonists of modern time. So if you have a chance to take a look at him, he does a lot of covers for the New York Times. He does a series of books called Acme Novelty Library. And in those books, he just tells whatever story he wants. He just talks about just random stories. He's got one amazing one called Building Stories that's out now. And so looking at Chris Ware, I wanted to be able to do my own version of Acme Novelty Library, but I wanted to be connected to the stuff that I had been doing before. So I named the little mini comic Strange Fruit, Uncelebrated Narratives from Black History. And so I started telling people, I started selling them. So I made these at like Kinko's, put them all together, and then I went to a comic shop. I went to a comic convention to sell them, just sell them to people, just like talking to people, getting the stories out there. And this had the story of Henry Box Brown, and then this amazing thing started happening, is that as I was telling these stories, people started telling me other stories. So I would tell the story of Henry Box Brown, and somebody said, have you ever heard of Harry Bucky Lou? And I said, no. So I'd write it down, and then I'd go do some research with my library degree. And I would have the story for Henry Box Brown, so I'd have another volume of Strange Fruit. This is based on a serial called Fruit Brute. And I would do all the covers were all parodies of something else. And then I would put the story of Harry Bucky Lou, and I'd have a second issue of Strange Fruit. I want to stand over here so everybody can see the board. And then I would go to this, I would do this one, and I'd go to this next convention, and people would tell me a new story. And they would say, have you heard of Malaga Island, which was an island off the coast of Maine that had a group of an interracial community on it that was completely wiped out by the state of Maine. So I would draw that story. Until eventually I had enough stories. And then, and it kept going, and I kept doing. This is a parody cover of the Spider-Man Amazing Fantasy number 15, which is the first appearance of Spider-Man. If you look, in the top, this is me at like 17 with Gary Kasparov when I was playing chess. Remember I told you I got a varsity letter in chess? That's me sitting across the table from Gary Kasparov. And this is me with Joe Biden. This was a campaign thing. I put it on there. So it's from comic book nerd from chess nerd to comic book nerd in 20 some odd years and a crap load of steps. So about this time, my publisher, Fulcrum, approached me, because I had sent some of the stories off to a couple of publishers and said, would you be interested in having these stories? And they were like, yeah, once you have the entire book, come back and talk to us. We'll take a look once you come back and talk to us. So I just kept making them, and before I was able to finish an entire book, Fulcrum came to me and said, we want to put the entire story together. We want them all. Like, we want to do it all together. And I'm like, great. So you guys are going to pay me to do what I'm already doing for free right now. And they said, yeah. And I'm like, all right. We go there. And then I was lucky enough to get Henry Louis Gates Jr. to write the foreword to the book, Strange Fruit, which led to a number of other sort of things that happened. So in the process of putting together Strange Fruit, Fulcrum had gone through this process of like, we're going to talk to you about teaching with comics. We're going to get this out to the kids. I actually didn't make comics for kids. I actually made them for hipsters. I was thinking to myself, I'm going to try to find people with money who like interesting stories and who will buy interesting things. And I'm like, uncelebrated narratives from Black history? Hipsters like weird stuff. I'm going to try to sell it to hipsters. That's what those comic book conventions that I went to were like. Most comic book, when you guys think of comic book conventions, you're probably thinking to yourselves like people dressed up like superheroes. But indie comic conventions are different. Indie comic book conventions have a lot of people dressed like Doctor Who, only that's just how they really dress. They're not really dressed up like anything. And so I started selling these books, and I went to my first book signing at a bookstore in Maine. I can't remember the name of the bookstore. But it was an indie bookstore because my publisher is an indie publisher, so they wanted to make sure I went to indie bookstores. And so I went there thinking, comics for hipsters. But Fulcrum was thinking comics for education, and I'm thinking comics for hipsters. And so I go in, and the owner of the bookstore comes up to me and he says, I want to thank you for telling these stories. That's not what a hipster, I'm like, I'm thinking hipsters were like, hey man, this is cool. But he said, thank you for telling the story. He got really emotional, which really changed the way I thought about these stories. And so during that whole talk, I'd been, everything was geared for comics for hipsters, quirky little stories, and started thinking about how important these stories were, just as a way in which we share our stories. And so my entire mentality about what I did shifted on that one moment. And it shifted from selling comics to hipsters, or even educational comics, to making comics to help people share the stories of Black history. Because these stories don't happen anywhere else. These are essentially American stories. And I did a TED Talk where I talked about this idea of rugged individualism. If everybody's familiar with the term rugged individualism, it's a term coined by Hoover talking about these people who would go out into the Midwest, into this barren wasteland, and sort of make their way out there without government support or intervention. And I got to thinking about that. Who best in America epitomizes going out into a barren wasteland and making something of yourself in the spite of government, and in most places, in the face of government intervention? It was Black people. And so I started thinking this idea that these stories, these shared stories, are a way for us to get these stories out, to humanize the understanding of what it means to be Black in America. So telling the stories of Henry Box Brown, Harry Bucky Lou, Bessie Stringfield, Bass Reeves, was all a way for me to say, Black people are just like everybody else in America. And in a lot of ways, we epitomize what that means, what it means to be an American. This idea that you fight in the face of all these obstacles to get there. It's hard to talk about with my students sometimes when I go through this process and talk about privilege. And they're like, Joel, you live in a big house in the country, you got a swimming pool, you drive a nice car. How can I have privilege? How can I have more privilege than you? And I said, it's not where I am, it's the hurdles that I had to jump to get there. Like even you, as a lower middle class person, are going to jump through less hoops than I had to jump through to get to here. And here's some examples. Bessie Stringfield was a black woman who in the 1930s and 40s rode her motorcycle all across the United States. She was the first woman to do it, and she did it 8 times. This was in the 30s and 40s. Women weren't supposed to ride motorcycles, let alone black women riding motorcycles in the South. And she did it. Now, when you say a woman does it, you say a man does that, you're like, that's an accomplishment. When you say a woman does that, you're like, wow, that's a really big accomplishment. When you say it's a black woman in the 1930s and 40s, you like, most people just, like they're astounded that a woman can do that. And a black woman can do that. And what that tells me, and what that told me and tells people that look at these stories is that black people can have just, I go home for Thanksgiving dinner in the South, and I have just as many arguments about Trump voters as white people do. So I have Trump voters in my family. There's black people, the black family is just like any other family. And these stories of American history are everybody's story. They're not just my story, they're not just your story. And so when shifting to my idea of using these stories to share the story of black people, I started by thinking about how we share our stories with ourselves. One of the things that we do as people, when you first meet someone, is you tell them your story. Where are you from? Who you know? I know this person, you know that person, oh, you probably went to school with my cousin. Those kind of things. You go through that process. That happens between communities too. And so, in order to get people to understand that, that's what I talk about. And I talked about this idea that I no longer think that racism is an appropriate word to talk about in these situations because racism comes with so many connotations. If I say somebody is racist, they put up a wall. And it's a wall built with misconceptions. It's a misconception to think, I am not some redneck in Mississippi burning crosses or using the N-word. I am not racist. When it's much more subtle than that. Racism is about a lack of empathy. It's a misunderstanding of the person in front of you. It's when Ralph Ellison said, they don't see me, they see through me. When Ralph Ellison in Invisible Man, when he was talking about being an invisible man, it was because people didn't see who he really was. They were looking through him and seeing the misconceptions of what black people are. A friend of mine talks about this thing that I think is a really important concept, which is black people were designed into existence. What I mean by that is all people in America did not come from the same place. Came from many different tribes, many different cultures. E pluribus unum, out of many, one. And because black people were designed into existence, because of the ideas that were placed on us after 1877 and the end of Reconstruction, we were designed to be a specific type of thing. And this happens to anybody. This is black people in America believe the exact same thing because we are inundated with the exact same media as everyone else. So when we look at black people, we see the same thing. We actually have to check ourselves, which people don't understand. That we have to do the exact same thing that white people should be doing more too, which is check ourselves when we think about what other black people are doing. Because we were designed into existence. And what I mean by that is media portrayals of black men have been overwhelmingly negative. Media portrayals of black women have been overwhelmingly negative. And even the positive ones, the ones that I like to call the magical Negro, you guys know what I mean, the Bagger Vance, like the black superhero who is like somehow connected to voodoo or some kind of a spiritual thing. Or you all had to fight so hard to get where you are. And I have people in my family, not on my side, but who have never lived in any kind of struggle at all. Like most of the people in some parts of my extended family went to college from as far back as my mother was the black sheep of the family, but some people in my family have always been the most prominent black people in town, so they've never had to struggle for some of those things. And so understanding that black people are weird and kooky and strange and just like country music and everything else just like everybody else in America. And that's what I try to do when I try to tell these stories, because I believe that racism is actually dead because it was killed by people who built those walls. Those walls built with the misconceptions that racism is one type of thing, because it's not one type of thing. It's a system that we live in that has oppressed black and brown and minority people since its inception. And one of the ways to think about this when you ever have the conversation with someone who says racism is dead is like point to a place in which it died. If you believe that this country was built for a specific type of person, white men who were educated, what law ended that? At what place can you point to that says that this is now the turning point where that is no longer the case? Because when you can't point to that, then you have a clear indication that it's still going on. And it's going on every single day. Yesterday, Philando Castile. Every single day it's still going. And if you are not part of the problem, and you're not all white people, then what are you doing to break down those systems? What are you doing to break down that infrastructure? I'll tell you what I'm doing. I'm a cartoonist trying to save the world. Sounds crazy. Little drawings to share with people about black people to show that we're just like everybody else. So I'm going to read to you one of my favorite stories in Strange Fruit. If we can cut some of these lights off. It's the story of a man named Spotswood Rice. Spotswood Rice wrote 2 letters. And we only have 3 actual documents that he actually existed. We have the document of his enlistment into Union Army. We have a letter that he wrote to his children. And we have a letter that he wrote to his slave master. So I drew the story, but none of the words are mine. I actually copied them directly from what Spotswood Rice wrote. So I'm going to read this to you, and then I'll talk to you a little bit about it, and then I'll answer any questions you all might have. My children, I take my pen in hand to write you a few lines to let you know I have not forgot you. Oh, and as a side, all of the misspellings and the broken English is specifically from his letter. I didn't change any of that, so it's not like I'm a bad speller. I am a bad speller, just not at this. I will have you if it costs me my life. On the 28th of the month, 800 white and 800 black soldiers plan to go up the river to Glasgow, and I expect to be with them. Don't be uneasy, my children. I expect to have you. Your Miss Kitty said I tried to steal you. God never intended for a man to steal his own flesh and blood. If I had any confidence in her, I have none now. And I want her to remember, if she meets me with 2,000 soldiers, she will meet her enemy. I have no sympathy for slaveholders. Give my love to all, Spotswood Rice. And here, if you can't see it, he's camped out, and he gets a letter here. And he realizes the letter's from his daughter. And so he reads the letter. And then he writes a letter to Miss Kitty. I received a letter from Mary telling me that you say I tried to steal my child. I have to get really close to see this point. Steal my child away from you. And I want you to understand, Mary is a God-given right of my own. Hold her as long as you can. But I want you to remember this one thing. The longer you hold my child from me, the longer you have to burn in hell, and the quicker you'll get there. Woe be to the copperhead rabbles and the slave-holding rabbles. For we are making up about 1,000 black troops, and we don't expect to leave them there, nor root nor branch. Just hold on as long as you can, and the worse it'll be for you. So she hears this and she starts backing up. She's trying to leave. I once offered to pay you $40 for my own child, and I'm glad now that you did not accept it. The day that we entered Glasgow, I want you to understand, Kitty Diggs, my child is my own. You call my child property. I have no fear about getting Mary out of your hands. And in 1925, there was a radio program project to catalog the voices of slaves, and they actually talked to Spotswood Rice's daughter, Mary. And she told the story, and she said, and that's how my daddy, Spotswood Rice, came and took me from slavery all those years ago. So, anybody have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Is this particular drawings, are they the style of all your stories?
Well, I've gotten better. I've gotten better since I did this one. Probably about 6 years ago, so I've gotten better since then. But yeah, this is.
There's some of his work on the table over here if you want to see it. So there's Strange Fruit, The Talented 10, and another volume of The Talented 10. So you can take a look.
I think as you move out and you think about ways in which to be more proactive about this thing, I think one of the important things is to share your story, is to make connections. I think most people have an understanding that we have to think on a macro level, but I think it's micro level connections that we need to make. One of my faculty was just in upstate New York, and she was with a gay man and a trans woman and her, and they were moving across the state. They were driving to San Francisco, and their car got stuck. This U-Haul they were in got stuck on the side of the road, and they were in upstate New York. And this guy in this truck with the Trump sticker comes on, and he pulls up and literally doesn't say anything to them and literally starts to help them. Just like takes the chain around the truck and he tries to get them to pull it out. He can't do it. So he literally flags down another Trump supporter in a semi. And then they talk to each other, they put it on there and they pull it out and like pull their truck out. Like this is like a black trans woman, a gay man, and one of my faculty members. And these Trump supporters just like pulled over and started helping them. And that's the thing that I think it's the most important thing to understand is that we can't demonize groups of people. You have to talk to them individually and share your story because everybody remember that the Black Jeopardy from Saturday Night Live, where all the Trump supporter was in the middle of all the black people and they started to like agree on a lot of stuff. I think we are so much more closer than we are separate, and I think we spend way too much time looking at how far apart we are. We need to look at where we have those commonalities. Because prejudice and bigotry doesn't hold up to contact, which is one of the most famous things that I think James Baldwin said. Doesn't hold up to contact. And so I think that making those connections and talking to those people is a really important thing. Don't put it talk to those people. I'm sure everybody in here knows some really wonderful person who would give you a kidney if they had to, but also voted for Trump. And I use that exact analogy because that's my wife's uncle. Like he is literally the kind of person that will give you a kidney. Because he did. He gave a man in his church a kidney. But he's a Trump voter. So I think it's like important to share your stories and make those connections. Studies have shown that when you make a personal connection, whether you're trying to get people to understand LGBTQIA plus rights, abortion, any of these things, you're trying to make a connection to get someone, you take away the macro and you make it a personal story, people are much more likely to agree with you and change their mind when you make it a personal story. And I think that's the thing that we have to think about. Sorry, I just started box. It's got my soapbox again. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Where can you actually purchase one of your books?
You can buy my books everywhere. Most bookstores have them. You can get them on Amazon. You can get them at fulcrumbooks.com. Local indie booksellers are a good place to find them. Amazon always has my books though.
Are the schools using your books? Are they buying them?
Some schools are. In some places they are buying them.
Students would love. It's a great way to learn history.
Hipsters too. Don't want to limit my market. I think everybody will. I mean, you know, the thing that I think is really important to remember is that I didn't write, you know, comics is a medium and not a genre. Most people think comics is a genre, like they think superheroes, and I almost never write superhero stories. I always draw stories about what I find interesting, which is Black history. And I think that that's the way we have to think about these things as a whole, is that, you know, when Strange Fruit came out, you know, like as a first-time author, you like run to the bookstore, you go to Barnes & Noble, run to Barnes & Noble looking for my book, and I'm in the comic section and I don't see it. And so I get really sad. And until finally I went up to the front, I'm like, you guys, and so like I have to like pretend like I'm not me. Do you have a book by an author named Joel Christian Gill? And they're like, yeah. And so they take me back to the cultural studies section, and Strange Fruit is sitting beside Roots, and I'm like, all right, I'll take that. Any other questions? Well, thank you all.
Thank you so much, Joel and Richard, for these amazing presentations today. It's just been such a great way to spend a Saturday celebrating the end of enslavement, really everywhere in America. And should we only live long enough to see the end to all the kind of crises and day-to-day pain that we're forced to live with, may we see it in our lifetime. So I am Jerry Ann asked me to say a few words as we close down our program. I'm on the board of directors of the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire. And I'm also one of the tour guides for the Portsmouth Black Heritage Trail. There are two other tour guides that have been here. I think they're still here, Nora Shoup and Kevin Mitchell. Would you stand up, please, and we'll give you a round of applause for your tour. Jubilee.
I'm not quite a tour guide yet. I'm just shadowing.
We're so excited to have someone doing our ranks. Yes. So my tour focuses on how enslaved and free Africans created community. They took care of each other by establishing their own fraternal societies, their own churches, their own schools, and their own charitable organizations. That was in the 1600s and 1700s. They gathered annually here and in other cities and towns in the north to elect their own Negro court. It's important for us all to know about and embrace these stories and to honor them as part of our history and restore them as part of the fabric of our culture. We've stolen some of that culture around us all the time without properly crediting it. It is part of our fabric of our culture. Let's recognize it more fully and embrace it more honestly. The African Burying Ground and the Black Heritage Trail are making visible things that we have forgotten. And one thing I want to say about that is, you know, a couple of years ago we proudly dedicated that burial ground. It's a lovely thing for the souls under the surface of that street. Let's take care of the people on the upside of that street. You know, let's be looking out for and taking care of the next generation of African American descendants from that enslaved period and treat them with greater justice and dignity. This trail is doing that. The Sankofa symbol at the burial ground reminds us that we have made a mistake. We have neglected something in our history.
We must go back and get it. Go back and correct what was wrong. We can't change the past, but we can remember in the present, and in remembering, we can correct the wrong. We tell the truth to correct the wrong. Now, here comes the advertisement part of this day. There are donation envelopes on that table when you came in the door. We really appreciated your donations today to make this program possible. But as you leave here, think about taking a donation envelope or even going online and Googling our Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire and help to continue this work. This all began more than 20 years ago. And together, we can become a model to have this kind of conversation about part of our history that we have not included in our history books. I'm asking you to make a gift to support this organization and the work that it does. And please consider the long-term stability of the Black Heritage Trail by thinking 3 and 5 years out. When you leave here today, your donation today will help today. But don't forget about us. Be part of us for the long term. Now, big news is we're looking for a home here in Portsmouth. We're in the process of working on that in a very clear and assertive way. We hope to be right here in downtown. So watch for developments about that. We expect that to happen in the next several months. If it's going to happen at all, it will be very soon. And I couldn't end this program without, first of all, thanking all of you for coming, because you're making such a difference just in your presence. And also to thank Valerie Cunningham for giving voice and name and visibility to the African colonials of Portsmouth and of New Hampshire. She discovered the first sale of an African to a Mr. Williams of the Piscataquack, which took place in 1645. So we share this heritage, and it's time that we owned it in a very full and proud way. We are going to proceed to the African burial ground, and Reverend Hilson will lead us there. You need to take all your things with you because the building is going to be locked now and will not reopen until 6 p.m. And we hope you will come back for the 7 p.m. conference with Reverend Bob Thompson. It is going to be a stunning program. I heard yesterday the dress rehearsal. So if, Reverend Hilson, if you could come forward, please. We're going to leave going out the door we came through, which is through to the parking lot, and then we will proceed around the building and up to the burial ground on State Street. Again, thank you all for coming. We see you tonight at 7 o'clock.
One has to stop and think that in August of 1619, 20 of my forefathers came over Virginia, and the question is, what happened to them? And I think that for about 240 years, till the 13th Amendment, we were invisible, except on the field. And when they died, did slaves ever die? Wow. If they died, where were they? Where are they? Go online, you'll find in New York they've got some buried. People think, well, the North, they must be somewhere disappearing. But yes, they hid. They hid us. Everybody hid us. And when they need more space, they just plowed over us. And so we're standing on sacred ground. Africans who believed when they died, they were connecting with a higher power, more meaning. So we've come today to honor those whose remains are here. And they're going to be reading the names, I believe, in a moment, of a number of people who were here. Thank you for being here. If you will just listen, remember these are names of people, flesh and blood, who walked on these streets, who labored in this city, who gave their best to help build this fine city. Right now, somebody needs to say amen. Say amen. 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 to the Queen herself. Here she is.
Thank you all. We know the name of one person, Primus Fowl, said to be buried here in the African burial ground. Today, we call the names of other Africans of color, Negro, and Black Americans identified in early Portsmouth history from 1645 to 1840. We do not include the many dozens of enslaved adults and children who were recorded by only one name or by no name at all. The following people are listed alphabetically by their first name. That is the name by which they were known when they walked here on Chestnut Street. Anna Sharp, Anna Molyneux, Anna Wise, Archelaus Jeffrey, Becky Quint, Benjamin Abbott, Benefita Walker, Betsy Sampson, Betsy Toby, Caesar Carey, Caesar Garish, Caesar Hunkins, Caesar Jennings, Caesar Hoyt, Caesar Loud, Caesar Noble, Caesar Sherburne, Caesar Whitney, Candace Spring Whitney, Candace Wentworth Spring, Cato Newmarch, Cato Warner, Sipho Hubbard, child of Becky Quint, child of Plum, child of Neptune, Crystal Quincy, Sipho Hubbard, Flips Oswald, Coffee Banfield, Cuff Chase, Cuff Parker, Cuffy Whipple, Cyrus Atkinson, Daniel French, Dinah Barney, Dinah King, Dinah Walker, Dinah Chase Whipple.
Dinah Dearborn, Dinah Gibson, Dinah Hart, Dinah Langdon, Dinah Ordeman, Dinah Parker, Dinah Byrne, Dinah Rollins, Dinah Shores, Elizor Cotton, Eliza Cutts, Elizabeth Appleton, Elizabeth Molinox, Laurel Studley, Fortune Henderson, Fortune Stavers, Frank Studley, Garrett Colton, Hannah Cockridge, Hannah Langdon, Hannah Ward, Isaac Webb.
Jacob Cutts, James Cotton, James Hunkins, James Wallace, Janie Driver, Janie Jones, Janie Talton, Jack Driver, Jack Harris, Jack Odiorn, John Driver, John Jack Warner, John Rice, Jonathan Gardner, Joseph Cotton, Joseph Schaaf, Juba Sparhawk, Jupiter Walker, Kittens Tuckerman, Marjorie Toby, and Mary Haley.
Molly Downey, Non Appleton, Nani Langdon, Nancy Cotton, Nancy Garish, Nancy Sherborne, Nancy Stilson, Nancy Walker, Nathaniel Adams, Nego Girl Beth, Neptune's husband Phyllis, Nero Brewster, Nero McPhee-Cedrus, Nero Sherborne, Nero Wheelwright, Newport Stills Freeman, Bruno Mary Judge, Oscar Mazur, Pamela Hart, Pedro Flores, Peggy Bushman, Peggy Dockery, Peter Forrest.
Peter Furlow, Peter Bass, Andrews, Peter Patch, Peter Warner, Farrell Rogers, Farrell Shores, Phyllis Belmont, Phyllis Foss, Phyllis Henderson, Phyllis Jennings, Phyllis Langdon, Phyllis Palmer, Phyllis Parker, Phyllis Shute, Phyllis Webb, Phyllis Wife of Neptune, Phoebe Burko, Phoebe Jennings, Plato Vaughn, Pomp Langdon, Pompey Spring, Portsmouth Pierce. Pyrus Powell, Chris Harvey Fordham, Chris Jackson, Chris McPheeters, Chris Stilson, Chris Wallingford, Chris Whipple, Kwame King, Kwame Quint, Kwaminio McPheeters, Kwaminio Silver, Rachel Whitworth, Richard Paulino, Robert Hummer, Romeo Ridge Freeman, Roxana Moffett, Sabina Walton, Sally Bush Long, Sally Chesley, Samson Hutchinson, Samuel Jordan, Samuel Wentworth, and Sepia Martin.
Sipho Langdon, Seneca Hall, Seneca Parker, Silas Bruce, Sylvia Carey, Sylvia Gill, Sylvia Jackson, Sylvia Sigmund, Sylvia Walton, Thomas Appleton, Thomas Bean, Thomas Modino, Titus Folsom, Tony Hunkins, Venus Bradford, Venus Tate, Violet Freeman, Violet Langdon, Violet Robbins, Violet Neal, Violet Weir, William Clarkson, Windsor Moffat, Zigalon Gardner, Gina Walker.
Okay, where is Sandy? We have so many queens today. Queen Sandy Clark. So you can.
Yes. Yes. Several of us stayed behind. We are the watchers, and we are waiting to have our stories told. Our mouths have crumbled into dust, and the flutes of our voices are heard no more. But our bones tell our story. The white man allowed us to bury the old woman with the rest of us, but they insisted she would not be laid to rest in the way of the church, as if there is only one way to worship, and that the white men own this as well as they own our bodies. What arrogance! It is not the sinful pride of which they preach in their sermons. How is it that God does not strike them down when they steal us from our mothers and fathers and bring us to this forsaken place? The old woman never bowed to them. In spite of her years, perhaps because of her advanced years, they cut a caution's berth around her, letting her collect plants for her healing. Many were the wives whose complaints were placated with the old woman's potions, And if the men's desired a stop to the visits, their women howled and shrieked in childbirth, pain, and suffered unduly. The stories told of the healings were many, and for this, the old woman enjoyed a kind of freedom in her dealings. She was even permitted to keep the small pieces of currency pressed into her hand. Although, at other times, the gifts were more generous, such as live chicken, who would give eggs for months before she served roasted, or buckets of fresh milk, or cups of mulberry flour that could be sieved and used in the baking. At her death, though, they told us she could join us in our burial community, but was to be set aside and separate. They oversaw our burial ritual on this day, when most times we would be left to mourn and grieve in our own way. They noted with care and steely eye that the crone was buried as a witch or a non-believer, with her head to the east and her feet to the west. I can hear the old woman crackling even now as I pitch the last shovel of dirt covering her coffin. She will take the long way around, crossing the full width of the globe, traveling west to east. But she will reach the land of ancestors before any of us others. Our hero is the courageous Ona. At night, we sing the story of her escape from Philadelphia, and in the market crave news of her life in nearby towns. She defied the most powerful man in the land. Your first president could not bring home to Philadelphia a slender, half-white, half-black servant to his wife, Martha. The old woman used to visit Ona's Greenland home, taking the Easter holiday afforded her by her mistress to walk the 8 miles, to and from 16 miles, 3 hours of walking for a 3-hour visit. I heard the smile in the old woman's voice when she told the sweet pleasure of sitting in the chairs that belonged to Ona. The walk pained her more each year, but sitting in the free air of Ona's kitchen always revived her. Promise lived in Ona's kitchen. Oh, to taste the life they earned. For those of you who had learned little of this barbaric time, know you this: the North was not an unwilling partner in the bleeding of resources from our skin. Yes, it did portray itself in the role of heroic when it engaged the South in the Great Confederation to rid the nation of the pestilence of slavery. But in those years, decades, centuries before, you profited from our sweat and our tears. Wade Mitchell.
None here has called me by my given name. The child calls me uncle, and I have taken the young one under my wing. I work with the potter, collecting and carrying clay back to the potter's site. It is to me to find the best material and cut it back in loads carried by me. I must mash and clean the clay before the master transforms it into bowls, mugs, or slop pots. I also collect the firewood and help arrange the vessels for the firing. They took my baby. Please, don't take my baby. The woman's cries pierce our hearts, but we must stand mute and filled with anger. We have seen this scene replayed time and time again as a white man, but more often a white woman, rips a black child from his mother's arms. Sometimes coins are exchanged Spain, but mostly they are taken away to an unknown location. We are made to witness the seizing of our bloodkin. I look across at other men, and I see their nostrils flare as the sole sign of their fury. We turn blazing eyes at one another, enraged at our powerlessness. The woman slumps to the ground. No, she throws herself into one of the open grave pits, begging to be buried alive. One of the white men jeeringly throws a shovel of dirt over her prostrate form. In my pain, she weeps. I am nothing without my child. Rough white hands pull her out of the hole and deposit her on the side of the living. But we know that she is forever married to death, even as she walks among us. We have been buried alive here, just as in the ships crossing the wide sea, when there were those of us very sick who were tossed into the water. The dead and the dying were treated equally in their eyes. And forgive us for our bitter gladness that we both envy them for their escape, and we're thankful for the extra water and rations that might be given us. Here in this burial ground, several of our numbers were laid into the earth ahead of their last breath. We heard weak knockings and sometimes low prayers of terror from inside the pin boxes. And when one of us understood and vomited, the men overseeing the laying in whipped him across the mouth. We did not choose this place, this far edge of the busy seaport town. White churchmen gave this space for our convenient disposal, away from the heartbeat of the mercantile hum of the money-making. In the beginning, 4 white men oversaw the operation of the Negro burial ground. And yes, it was an operation, a job with pay and benefits. 2 men reveled in their exercise of power. One was indifferent. But the 4th was plagued with conscience and heartache. Once when they tipped the coffin over before dropping it in the grave shaft, this one attempted to right the body inside by rocking the box back. In another instance, this one gouged his shovel into the soft stone so the coffin would lie flat. Later, the town did not employ men to tend to the Negro burials. And though we did not choose this place, we began the job of burying our brothers, sisters, children, and parents here. You must know that this was never sanctified ground for us, as others imposed this place on us. Our weary limbs built your grand homes, our backs toiled in your fields, and on your ships we sought your meals with our tears. We paved your streets with our anguish. And you repay us in this manner? By building your city over our heads, then carving through our graves with your clay pipes, carrying piss and feces, and gouging it again through our bodies with gas and water lines? And now you honor us? By what means do you honor us?
I'm going to ask that wherever you are, just reach out and take your neighbor's hand. Everybody take somebody's hand. Let's come together. Closing with a poem, an African poem. Praise ye, Lord. Peace be with us. Say that the elders may have wisdom and speak with one voice. Peace be with us. Say that the country may have tranquility. Peace be with us. And the people may continue to increase. Peace be with us. Say that the people in the flock and the herds may prosper and be free from illness. Peace be with us. Say that the fields may bear much fruit, and the land may continue to be fertile. Peace be with us. May peace reign over earth. May the gourd cup agree with vessel. Peace be with us. May their heads agree and every ill word be driven out into the wilderness, into the virgin forest. I ask that you now repeat after me. Peace be with us.
Peace be with us.
Amen.
Amen.
Before we go on to the next part of our program, I just wanted to raise your attention to the pieces that you heard came from Kathleen Wheeler, her writing. Kathleen? There are only 2 of the many stories that she has, and they'll be made into a play shortly. We're working on that, so that should be, hopefully we'll be doing that soon. So I want to thank you all for coming out and sharing this moment with us. We have at 7 o'clock a concert featuring Reverend Bob Thompson at Middle Street Baptist Church, which will be of African spiritual songs, Negro songs, and spiritual songs. So we hope you'll join us, and we just thank you for sharing this June 17th, the Juneteenth program with us. And in closing our program, we'll have our drummer really do a solo for us.
Good evening and welcome to, this is a really exciting event. My name is Chris Dunaway. I'm the pastor here at Middle Street Baptist Church. On behalf of our church family, I want to offer you all a very special welcome to our place of worship. It's really an honor to have all of you here. It's especially an honor for us to host this event for the inauguration and the kickoff of the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire. It's historic and it's exciting for all of us. As many of you know, this is part of a Juneteenth celebration. Juneteenth dates back to June 19th, 1865. Most of you, I'm sure, know this, but for anybody who doesn't, on June 19th, 1865, Union soldiers landed in Galveston, Texas. And they came with a message, two messages. The first is the war is over, and the second is all slaves are free. Now, those of you who are students of history know that actually 2.5 years prior, on January 1st, 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation went into effect that declared all slaves free. And so what Juneteenth was not just a recognition of what had already been done in the Emancipation Proclamation, but it was also a recognition of the work that remains to be done. And so Juneteenth celebrations, even up until today, are the same thing. It's a celebration of the work that has been done, and it's a recognition of the work that remains to be done. And my commendations, and I just want to honor the Black History Trail of New Hampshire, the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire. You've done some amazing, amazing work. It's our honor to host this event. It's our honor to host Reverend Robert Thompson this evening. Now, about a year ago, Reverend Thompson and I preached together at an event at a nearby church, New Hope Baptist Church. And I had the privilege of sitting right next to Reverend Thompson. And he got up and he sang a song. He sang, "Were you there when they crucified my Lord, our dear friend?" Some of you may know the song. And everybody heard him sing and sing incredibly. Because I sat right next to him, I felt him sing. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, you're about to know what I'm talking about. It is my hope that as we listen to Reverend Thompson sing this evening, that we don't just hear him sing, but we feel him sing. So welcome to all of you, and I want to give a special welcome and introduction to Reverend Robert Thompson. Thank you so much for being here.
Into temptation, Lord, deliver us from evil, for thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Thank you. And I also like to let you know that I like the sound of children crying in church. It's a hopeful sound. And of course, it does help that it's my grandson who's doing the crying. Welcome. I thank you all for coming. It means a great deal to me as a performer, and certainly as someone who is working on this wonderful new venture, the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire. I'm so grateful to all of you for coming. Earlier today, we had a reception, and I forgot to make one acknowledgement. You may know that the Portsmouth Black Heritage Trail was founded by people who are in this room now. We're very grateful to them. You could walk around Portsmouth and see markers. There was a time, though, before we established the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire, when we needed to find a home for the Portsmouth Black Heritage Trail. And the Portsmouth Historical Society welcomed this organization into its fold and kept us safe for a few years until we were able to establish our new organization. I don't know if Kathleen or Ed are here, but we owe a great deal of gratitude to the Portsmouth Historical Society, who was our holding place, and we're grateful to them. So thank you, Historical Society. I hope you understand there will be an unplanned break in this concert. During the dress rehearsal, I got so wet that I said, okay, I need to change my shirt before we're done with this. So after I sing, and you have a program, I guess. Okay, so after the break will come. Where did we decide the break is going to come, Barbara? Okay. We'll figure it out. And during the break, when we have the break, then Jerry Ann Bogus will come and she will have some words for you. That's because we don't want you to get up and leave, because it's not going to be a long break, just long enough for me to change my shirt and my tie. The Lord's Prayer is often sung. Oh, one more thing. I would ask that you would observe the groupings, and if you feel moved to applaud, just kind of hold it until that group is done, and then applaud them. That would be what I would prefer. Of course, if you get moved, and just let the Spirit move you. Just go with it. Just go with it. The Lord's Prayer was written by Albert Hay Malott, who did not write a lot of sacred music. He was actually a film guy. He wrote a lot of the scores for Disney films and some other people. And the Lord's Prayer was his first sacred work, and he only wrote a couple of others. And he wrote this in 1935. That song has been recorded by the Beach Boys, as well as Barbara Streisand and Perry Como, and now by Robert Thompson, thanks to our recorders. Steal Steal away to Jesus. lost in this wild world, alone. No hope have I for tomorrow. I'm striving to make heaven my home. My mother, she's reached that pure glory. My father's still walking in sin. My brothers and sisters, they don't want me because I've been born again. Sometimes, Lord, I'm storm-tossed and driven, Lord. Sometimes I don't know which way to roam. Oh, but I've heard of a city, and it's called heaven, and I'm striving to make heaven my home. Sometimes, Lord, I'm storm-tossed and driven, Lord. Sometimes I don't know which way to roam. Oh, but I've heard of a city, and it's called heaven, and I'm striving to make heaven my home. If thou but suffer God to guide thee, and call on him through all thy ways, he'll give thee strength whatever betide thee, and guard thee through the evil days. Who trust in God's unchanging love builds on the rock that naught can move. Only be still and wait his pleasure in cheerful hope with heart content to take whatever thy Father's pleasure, and all discerning love hath sent. Nor doubt our inmost wants are known to God who chose us for his own. Sing, pray, and keep God's ways unswerving. Soul, do thine own part faithfully, and trust God's word, though undeserving. Thou yet That hymn has been remade and is present in many hymnals, but in the hymnal I've used for most of the last 30 years, it's written in that way, and I love the words, and I've come to love that hymn. And it is a song of praise, and it fits the theme. For what we've heard are spirituals, and then this hymn. The spirituals, Steal Away, and Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, perhaps familiar to you that you've heard before, arranged in a way you probably have not heard before by the great arranger of spirituals, Harry T. Burleigh. Burleigh's spirituals were the ones that made this music appropriate for concert presentation. These were the arrangements that Marian Anderson and Paul Robeson sang, and Leontine Price and Kathleen Battle. They still sing these arrangements by Burleigh. And I think that you will agree with Barbara and I that sometimes these arrangements seem so very modern, as if he's anticipating the jazz age, some of the harmonics, but he wrote this at the turn of the 20th century. So I'm very grateful to Harry T. Burleigh for what he's done for us, and for what he continues to do as people sing and remember this music and encounter it. We don't know if the slaves, if the Africans who were residents of Portsmouth had an experience in the South, in the fields, where they might have sung these songs, for these songs originated there. They were born of faith and of struggle. And when you hear the song, the words to Steal Away or Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, it is indeed grounding them in their faith. Maybe they were here and they did not follow Christianity. They might have been Muslim. Many of them were. But still they're grounded in God. Steal away to Jesus. In times of great difficulty, I imagine that song gave them a great deal of comfort. And then Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, the promise of heaven, the promise of freedom. These are people who believed what the Bible taught, but also understood it had a practical ramification. For sometimes Steal Away was a cover song for someone who was literally stealing themselves away from the master. And likewise for Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, and likewise for most of the others. They were also always used as cover for those who were trying to escape bondage. This next spiritual is one that actually has its origins a little different. It's really a white spiritual. It was born in Appalachia and was part of what Europeans sang from time to time as they made their move across the West, around camp circles, wayfaring stranger. I'm just a poor wayfaring stranger, a-traveling through this world of woe, and there's no sickness, no toil or danger in that fair land to which I go. I'm going there to meet my mother. I'm going there no more to roam. I'm just a-going over Jordan. I'm just a-going over home. My father lived and died a farmer upon, and now I know less than he did. And though I follow in his footsteps, I know the time will come and end. I'm going there to see my father. I'm going there no more to roam. I'm just a-going over Jordan. I'm just a-going over home. bounteous fields rise up before me, where God's redeemed their vigils keep. I'm going there to meet my mother. She said she'd meet me when I come. I'm just a-going over Jordan. I'm just a-going over home. And I couldn't hear nobody pray. I couldn't hear nobody pray. Oh, way down yonder by myself. And I couldn't hear nobody pray in the Jordan. Couldn't hear nobody pray crossing over. Couldn't hear nobody pray. And my Savior, I couldn't hear nobody pray. On my knees, I couldn't hear nobody pray. Oh Lord, I couldn't hear nobody pray. Oh Lord, I couldn't hear nobody pray. Oh, way down yonder by myself. And I couldn't hear nobody pray. I couldn't hear nobody pray. Crossing over, I couldn't hear nobody pray. With my Jesus, couldn't hear nobody pray. And my Savior, I couldn't hear nobody pray. Oh Lord, I couldn't hear nobody pray. Oh Lord, I couldn't hear nobody pray. Oh, way down yonder by myself. And I couldn't hear nobody pray. My brother wanted a religion, go down in the lonesome valley. My brother wanted to get salvation, go down in the lonesome valley. Go down in the lonesome valley. Go down in the lonesome valley, my Lord. Go down in the lonesome valley and meet my Savior there. My sister want to get salvation, go down in the lonesome valley. My sister want to get It is it's a truth that if you want to find some true faith, it does require a journey that is often solitary and often deep into pain, deep into struggle. And it's an honor to sing this music that is born of that deep journeying, not by their choice, but by making the music. And if it worked for them in any way like it works for me, just singing the song is part of the solution. Just vocalizing, just yearning, just articulating it, just testifying that it's the deep journey that brings me to God, that gives me my religion and my salvation and my hope. All of that. This was, I imagine it being like eating good meat for them when they sang, that they lived and they survived. They used their faith. And I stand here as evidence that their faith was substantive. Amen? Amen. It's all right to say amen. It's in the church. Amen. You can say, Baptists say amen. Amen. All right. Okay, so I'm going to introduce these next songs. Much of the music that the slaves sang about was borrowed from Scripture, especially from the Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament. And then I have a special connection with this music. The song that I'm about to sing, in the middle of the night, way before day in the morning, as they say, about 3 or 4 o'clock, I guess, I woke up weeping one night. And I did not know what was going on in my life that would have required nocturnal tears as a solution. But there was nothing. But not only was I weeping, but I was also chanting this song. And I learned then that something had happened in my heart. This song had found its way into my heart, really from sitting and joining students in Shabbat services on Friday night and singing this song. And I actually used to joke that if there is such a thing as reincarnation, and I'm not sure if the Bible is so specific about this, maybe we can debate this, but if there was, I believe I was a Polish Jew in a previous life. It's really because of just how I felt about the literature of Isaac Bashevis Singer. I felt like I knew the people he was writing about, like they had grown up in my hometown instead of on Krakmalna Street in Poland. But I digress. This song has a great deal of meaning to me. And I'll share with you the words in English. Bless me. Okay, now I have to read my handwriting. Bless me, O angels of peace. Bless me for peace, O angels of peace. I wrote, bless me for shalom, which is the way that I saw it. Bless me for shalom. Shalom means peace. Bless me for shalom, O angels of shalom, angels of the exalted one. From the King who reigns above all kings, the Holy One, blessed be he. May your coming be for peace, O angels of peace, angels of the exalted one. From the King who reigns over kings, the Holy One, blessed be he. And the chant is sung for Shabbat on Friday. And the belief is that there are good angels and bad angels that are with you. But if you ask for a blessing, the bad angels have to say bless you in response. And so that way you win the bad angels as well as praise the good angels. Shalom Aleichem. Shalom Aleichem, Malakei HaSharetz, Malakei Elyon, Melech, Malakei Amlakim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Boachem leshalom, Malakei HaShalom, Malakei Elyon. Melech, Malakei Amlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Bachuni leshalom, Malakei HaShalom, Malakei Elyon. Mi melech Oh, freedom over me. And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. And go home to my Lord and be free. No more master, no more mistress, no more owner over me. And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. And go home to my Lord and be free. No more hiding, no more running, no more escaping, oh, for me. And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. And go home to my Lord and be free. Joshua fit the battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Joshua fit the battle of Jericho, and the walls come tumbling down. That morning, Joshua fit the battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Joshua fit the battle of Jericho, and the walls come tumbling down. You may talk about your man of Gideon, you may talk about your man of Saul, but there's none like good old Joshua at the battle of Jericho. Up to the walls of Jericho, he marched with spear in hand. Go blow them ram horns, Joshua cried, 'cause the battle am in my hand. Then sheep horns begin to blow, trumpet begin to sound. Joshua commanded the children to shout, and the walls come tumbling down. That morning, Joshua fit the battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Joshua fit the battle of Jericho, and the walls come tumbling down. Days, 40 nights, when the rain kept a-falling, the wicked climbed the tree and for help kept a-calling, for they heard the waters wailing. Didn't it rain? Rain? Didn't it rain? Tell me no. Didn't it rain? Some climbed a mountain, some climbed a hill, some started sailing and rowing with a will. Some tried swimming, and I guess they're swimming still, for they heard the waters wailing. Didn't it rain? Rain? Didn't it rain? Tell me
much for being part of this celebration. One of the things we talked about earlier was this journey, the hero's journey. And I had to write this down. So there's some steps that Joseph Campbell writes about when you're taking this hero's journey. And there are 5 steps. The first is answering that inner call to the adventure. You hear that voice, and there's something, no matter what it is, that compels you to answer that call. The second step is committing wholeheartedly to that quest, to that call, doing what it takes to go out and answer it. The third thing, this is a part that's the struggle, right, of taking that journey. You enter into an unknown world, and you have no idea what the outcome is going to be. There's stumbling blocks, there's the challenges, there's all of the heartaches, the pain in that part of the journey. For some of us, I use Valerie as an example here, Valerie Cunningham. The unknown world she entered into over 60 years ago was that of Black history here in Portsmouth, and beyond her little town to Black history in the state. And in so doing, going to that place, trying to find the language, trying to find the stories, trying to tell them, we all come upon the stumbling blocks, because these stories ask all of us to rethink what we know history to be, especially here in New Hampshire. It asks us to find the words to talk about it. It asks us to look at our founding fathers differently. There is no judgment being made, but it asks us to think about these things differently, and in so doing, find ourselves in that place. And after you go through all these struggles, and you go through the stumbling blocks, you get the gift. You know, the hero in these journeys, he gets a talisman, or something that he comes out with. And that's for Valerie and for us, it's the telling of these stories. That you have to, once you're given this talisman and you've done that part of the journey, you're asked to share it with your community. Because that's what we're here for. We're not here to keep this gift to ourselves. We're here to make each and every other person that we meet better for having met us. And so, that's the journey of the hero. And we're so grateful that you're all here, joining in that journey with us. Because we're all heroes in our own life. And we have to take those little steps, no matter what it is, to be that change in the world that we want to see. That's about the journey. And that's what we're trying to do. That's the work we're doing with the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire. We want to change the world. Little tasks, big dreams, but I think we can do it. If we can do this here in New Hampshire, gather people in a place that they say has no Black history, right? We can resurrect an African burying ground. We can put a monument in that place for the whole world to see. We can have an archaeologist writing stories about the people that are buried there, the unknown people that are buried there. If we can do that in Portsmouth, it's possible anywhere. And I truly believe that. And by looking at these stories, by retelling the stories, by changing them, we're changing ourselves and others. We're not looking at people by the stereotypes that we think we know people are. We're looking at each other as individuals, humans, with the same hopes, desires, wishes, wants that we all share. Is my 5 minutes up? just going to ask you all to please stand. For the volunteers that are here with the trail, please stand and be recognized. Because you've done an awesome job to celebrate Juneteenth. Nora, you didn't stand. And I'm just going to ask one of our board members to just come and say a few words. Angela?
I was just appreciating Jeremy Ann for a moment for the great day that she put together today. From early this morning until tonight, it's just been an outstanding opportunity to be in community with all of you who've shown up at various points along the day. Thank you so much for being part of it. I was reading this program and I really appreciated what Bob wrote under Wayfair and Stranger. We are sovereign over our own experience. Responsibility for our presence in the world belongs to each of us. Yet we have an opportunity to link that sovereignty to a greater sovereignty. That vital journey from isolation to communion is arduous and lonely, yet it has been a necessary ingredient in the forward progress of America's Africans. And I would say America's Americans. It's an arduous journey, we're all on it together. My role in this as a board member is to ask you to think about supporting the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire. Share with us whatever resources you might want to bring to bear so this good work can continue in this community. Portsmouth's a model national for what we're doing, and though we can take part in that, we can also take ownership in it by giving what we can to the work that needs to be done. And it's a new fledgling organization, evolved from a very fine Portsmouth Black Heritage Trail. Has been around a long time, but we're getting on a new start, and we would appreciate all that you can do. So on your way out, pick up a donation envelope and think about the way in which you might support the good work this organization is doing, not just to us, but everywhere. Thank you.
I know you're breathtakingly waiting for the Reverend to come back and fill us spiritually, so I'll be quiet.
Okay. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. Alone think I made an error in not including on the program the name of my accompanist. This is Barbara Flacco. Barbara and I just love this music, especially that song we just sang. And we had a lot of questions. What music would follow Weeping Mary? And I decided I didn't want to, nothing really. So I thought I'd just talk a little bit after Weeping Mary because it's so unusual. Had anyone ever heard that spiritual before? No. Isn't it beautiful? And that arrangement, just sets it off so nicely. So we're in the home stretch. And I noticed that my collar was wet before I even got out of the room, so much for plans. Now, a little Bach. Let me just say that these songs, these first three, are songs that really testify to the presence of Jesus in your life and the lives of those who made this music. That is the substance. Their faith was real. And then there's something that happens that when you begin to give voice to your faith, you feel like praising. So, substance and evidence. blind man stood on the road and cried. Oh, the blind man stood on the road and cried, crying, oh, my Lord, save me. The blind man stood on the road and cried, crying that he might receive his sight, crying that he might receive his sight, crying, oh, my Lord, save me. The blind man stood on the road and cried, crying, what kind of shoes and those you wear? Crying, what kind of shoes and those you wear? Crying, oh, my Lord, save me. The blind man stood on the road and cried, crying, these shoes I wear and the gospel shoes, crying, these shoes I wear and the gospel shoes, crying, oh, my Lord, save me. The blind man stood on the road and this track, it run to heaven and run straight back. Oh, every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. Yes, every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. I will Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, we have already come. 'Tis grace hath brought us safe thus far, and grace will lead me home.
Thank you so much for joining us. Let's just say one more word of thank you to Reverend Thompson. It was an honor to have you sing. It was an honor to have all of you